Oliver Wendell Holmes famously said, "The right of a man to swing his fist stops at another man's nose." And it's a good segue into the First Amendment and the limitations on First Amendment rights. People have a right to protest, but they do not have a right to commit violence, to threaten, to harass, to commit acts of vandalism, and so forth. And so I'm going to address this in light of current events, not only the anti-Israel protests on U.S. college campuses, but also the protests against the ICE seizing and detention of people from Mexico to deport them. And most recently, the protests in Los Angeles and the Trump administration sending federal law enforcement and militia to restrain and stop the protesters. And I want to point out that my sympathies lie on opposite sides on the two issues. As a Jew, as you all know, I am totally opposed to the anti-Israel position in the protests on U.S. college campuses, whereas I am completely sympathetic with Mexican immigrants who have worked hard and are here as productive people. And I think before I go on, to put it in perspective so that you'll perhaps perceive what I say with a little greater credibility, because I do see things differently on the two sides philosophically. I've never shared my political affiliation. The fact is, as a younger man, I was a liberal, not a far left liberal, but I was left of center. As I've gotten older, I'm more conservative, although I'm certainly not a conservative or a Republican. But I was a lifelong independent. I'm an independent currently. But 25 years ago, I registered as a Democrat for the first time and stayed as such for a few years. And it was because of our policy in the United States on immigration. I was extremely upset by the treatment of Mexican immigrants. I was living outside of San Diego, and we had come out of a recession, and suddenly people needed all kinds of labor. There were not people to be found to do work. Mexican immigrants were willing to do work that nobody else would. And in the community I was living, which was a new flourishing community, there was always work for them, and people were just all too happy to hire them. And then the economy changed again, and all of a sudden, they were treated like vermin, and they were treated like the source of all our ills, which was absolutely provably false. And it struck me how unjust, inequitable, and unfair it was to ask these people to do work that nobody else would and then throw them on the scrap heap when we decided we didn't need them anymore. And so I registered as a Democrat at the time. Immigration, like so many policies and so many laws, are nuanced and need to be nuanced because there are so many different situations, and you can't treat everybody the same, and lumping everybody together as a class as criminals or such just is not true. We should get criminals out of the country, but most of our Mexican immigrants come here and they work hard and they're contributing members of our society. Oftentimes we've had them come fight in the military and serve and then be faced with being kicked out of the country. I find that just absolutely unacceptable. But there's no question we have to discuss immigration reform, and it has to be a nuanced discussion. And so I understand protesters' opposition to how ICE is treating these immigrants. And I share those concerns, and I bristle. And I support them protesting. But If some of the reports are true, there have been instances of violence by protesters, throwing objects, that kind of thing. And you can't do that. The First Amendment protects speech. It does not protect violence or other criminal conduct. And of course, the same is also true on college campuses. And I just saw a video of a UCLA student, a Jewish young man, who was confronted with a wall of Palestinian protesters preventing him from crossing the campus. It is just absolutely outrageous and beyond the pale that something like that should happen on a tax-funded university. This individual, this Jewish student, is presumably a tuition-paying student. He has a right to go to class and to cross the campus unimpeded by protesters. And so in either circumstance, protesters have to abide by the law and protest peacefully. And if they don't, they need to face the consequences. And there should be consequences. I see a number of these videos on social media, and so many of the commentators on both sides, they talk in conclusionary terms. We need facts. It's one thing to say it's late. It's another thing to give the time. What is late to one person may not be late to another. 10 p.m. is an irrefutable fact. 10 o'clock p.m. is a fact. So in considering what people say, consider the facts in support of the conclusions. And when we hear and see media coverage about the protests, consider the reported facts. And right now, the information about the protests in LA regarding ICE are a little spotty. But let's watch for video and let's look for more facts to see what the protesters are doing. I can say with regard to the protests on college campuses that the harassment, the threats, the vandalism, they're real because I've just seen too many videos to prove it so. It's undeniable. And when you consider this, consider the arguments of the protesters. The end does not justify the means. And so many of these so-called social justice warriors, they think they have a license because they are narcissistically inclined towards their own moral propensities to believe that the end does justify the means. They're just wrong. I heard this expression just today. This is not my own. This is from a news correspondent in Denver named Dan Grossman. And he said, none of this can be condoned as anti-Semitic cowardice disguised as activism. Anti-Semitic cowardice disguised as activism. Activism has its place. Protests are terrific. Again, I support the protesters standing up for immigrants, but let's make sure that they are abiding by the law and that they are not interfering with other people's rights in stating their position.